my son asked me this question. And at one point he asked me, did I leave the UK because of them? And that was a real kicker. And I'm like, no, I actually did it for me because I'd always been something to someone, but not to myself.
Welcome to Flourish in the Foreign, the award-winning podcast that celebrates, elevates, and affirms the voices and stories of Black women living and thriving abroad, while exploring living abroad as a pathway to wellness. I'm your host, Christine Job, a Black American with Trinidadian roots, business strategist and writer from Atlanta, based in Valencia, Spain. Hey everyone, welcome to season 6 of Flourish in the Foreign. I am your host, Christine Job. Welcome to the podcast if you're new. Welcome back to everyone who has been rocking with me for 6 seasons. Wow, it's going to be the 5th year of the podcast in May. And just thank y'all. Thank you all for listening to the podcast. Thank you all for supporting the podcast. And thank you all for all of your love and support while I put the podcast on hiatus last year. Yeah, that was needed. I feel great. Hiatus was delicious. I highly suggest it to everyone. Go on hiatus. Well, I am back with a new season of incredible stories that y'all gonna love. I say this every season, and clearly I'm biased, but I'm still right all the time. I don't know what you want me to say. I think I'm right. Yes. I do think that this is going to bring you joy, and I do think that these stories are going to delight you. So, yes. As we kick off this year, I just want to send y'all so much love. I want to also encourage all of you to hold on to and nurture the people, the places, the things that bring you joy. Okay? If you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that a beautiful life, a life well lived, does not befall you. You must be an active participant in cultivating a life well lived. And that means to turn your attention to pour your love into, to utilize your resources on the people, the places, and the things that bring you joy, that delight you, okay? That is how you cultivate a life well lived. And for 2025, I wish that for all of you. All right, let's get into this season. Season 6, Episode 1. So we kick off this season of Flourish in the Foreign with a limited series. Allow me to introduce to y'all Aging Abroad, a series, a limited series, which is now probably going to be an ongoing series within Flourish in the Foreign. You can catch clips of this interview on social media like YouTube and TikTok. And if you subscribe to my Substack, you can watch the entire interview, including parts that I couldn't include here in this episode. Today's guest is Janice Sutherland. Janice is the founder of This Woman Can, an award-winning leadership and personal development firm dedicated to empowering mature professional Black women. Notably, she made history as the first female CEO in the telecom sector in her ancestral country, Antigua and Barbuda. Janice is also the author of the international bestseller, This Woman Can, the No Bullshit Guide for Women Who Lead, and is the host of This Woman Can podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation with Janice. She is so delightful. So I will let Janice tell you all about it.
My name's Janice Sutherland, and I am just a couple of days shy of 60. And I live in the beautiful Twin Island state of Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean for almost 14 years, my husband and I. And we have no plans to return to the UK.
I asked Janice to share about her childhood and if she felt that there were any occurrences in her childhood or perhaps ways in which she was raised that planted the seeds of living a life outside the UK.
I am the first generation immigrant. So my mother's Antiguan and she moved to the UK when she was 13. She was born in Antigua, but when I did my genealogy, there was a major hurricane, which meant she actually lived most of her years in St. Kitts, which is where the family actually comes from. So my grandmother is Antiguan. My grandfather is Kittitian. So half the family was from St. Kitts and part of the family is from Antigua. And they were part of the Windrush generation. In the UK, lots of Caribbean migrants went to the UK in the 50s and 60s, and she was one of them. I am the eldest of 6. And so I've always had a level of responsibility. My mom was single. She had 6 kids by the time she was 23, which I'm always in awe of. And what I would say at that point, there was no inkling of me moving to the Caribbean. It just wasn't a thought.
I asked Janice, what was the impetus for desiring to leave the UK?
My son asked me this question. And at one point he asked me, did I leave the UK because of them? And that was a real kicker. And I'm like, no, I actually did it for me. Because I'd always been something to someone, but not to myself. So I was a mother, the eldest daughter. I was responsible. I was a leader. I had senior roles in the UK. I'd been divorced. I'd had a very tumultuous first marriage. So at this point in my life, I'd gone back to school. I'd done my degrees, had a very successful career. This just seemed like a natural evolution to me as to, okay, what's next? I've always been very adventurous when I think about it. So let's give it a try and let's do it with someone I actually like. Nothing ventured, nothing gained per se. As I said, I wanted a little bit of a quieter life, I think, because as I said, I've been quite senior roles. I was at the top of my career and I thought, you know what? It's time to take a step back just to enjoy life. When it became a thought is when I met my now husband, and I'm in my 40s. I was just turning 40. So we've been together we've been together 20 years now, just turning 40. And pretty much on our first date, he says, I have no intention of staying in the UK. That's not my plans. I plan to migrate to Jamaica because that's where my family's from. And they built a family house and he had planned to move there. And I was like, well, he's a bit of a keeper. So, the date's going well, but maybe Jamaica's not the place for me because no matter what I do, I always feel like a foreigner when I go to Jamaica because they know you're from Farin. I said, so come and see Antigua. I'm bringing Mom back to Antigua for her 60th birthday because she had never been back since she left as a child. So I brought her to Antigua and he loved it. It's a lot quieter as Jamaica. It's not as fast. It's not as built up. We're 108 square miles. We're very small, 100,000 people. So it's like a huge village. So we bought the land, built the house, told our family that's what was our plans. We got married out here. I have 2 children. By that time, 2 grown sons. So we shared what we planned to do and they had the option to come and they said, it's not for us. So, as I like to say, we left home. When I got here, I was applying for jobs because I could apply for Antiguan citizenship through my mom. So I could legally work. So I thought, I know I can't not work. I don't have a pension or I'm still too young to that. So I still need to have a job. So I managed to get a job with one of the local telecoms company here. And in short order, within 5 years, I became their first female CEO for Antigua and for Montserrat, for 2 countries. And that's when I was like, whoa, I'm working even harder now than I ever did in the UK. And that was not the plan. So I gave notice. I gave 6 months notice when they were going through a restructure and said, it's not for me. I'm going to do something else. I want to live life. Very hard conversation. My husband and I had that because I was the main breadwinner. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew I was miserable doing what I was doing. And it wasn't the life I'd envisaged. So he just said, you've been doing it long enough. And if you want to do something for you, do it. So I did. And so I then started my own company. This Woman Can.
I was very curious to learn more about the process of purchasing land and building a home in Antigua.
We originally had a 5-year plan. So when we decided we're going to make this move, we said, okay, we'll give ourselves 5 years. We're both working still in the UK. We can build the house from afar. We had a managed build. So we were quite lucky that we had a turnkey build. So we didn't have to deal with some of the horror stories that we would heard about Jamaican returnees who are sending money over, but the builder's taking the money when they go there. It's just a pile of bricks or no house at all. We got regular updates from the builder because it was a turnkey build. And we had people, we'd made some friends who were sending us updates of what was happening. So as I said, it was originally a 5-year plan. And in that interim, I was still applying for jobs. And when I got the job with the telecoms company, I suddenly realized it was a major company, not just a local company. It was a regional company. And jobs at this level didn't come up very often. So I had to take it. So that brought our timeline down to 3 years. And then I realized once the house was built, because it'd taken us probably maybe 18 months, 12 to 18 months to build it, I didn't want anybody to live in the house apart from me because we thought we'd rent it out to generate some income before we moved. And I was like, no, it can't be that. It can't be that. Someone can't live in there before we do. So that just, I suppose, having that mindset and getting the job just sped up the timeline. I landed on the 30th of June and I was at work on the 4th of July. So I went straight into work.
I always like asking my guests about the first year that they are abroad because the first year is such a crazy year for most people. It's also usually not really indicative of how the rest of your time will go because you're trying to regulate yourself and get accustomed to new culture, language, people. And so I asked Janice what was her first year like living in Antigua, a majority Black country, especially coming from the UK.
I realized quite quickly is that it's a whole different vibe being a majority in a country as opposed to minority in a country. And I didn't realize how much I had felt that till I was actually the majority. You'd go into banks, you'd go into organizations, and you'd be predominantly Black faces. A white face was not a rarity. They were there in the more touristy areas. We expected to find them. But on an everyday basis, everybody looked like you. And that was such a feeling I didn't realize. A feeling I didn't realize I'd had about being a minority until I became the majority. So so comforting. It's probably the word I'm looking for. I always tell people if you're coming here to expect the first world environment, you're going to be very disappointed. So I think it's having to accept that things aren't going to be the same as what you left and learning to have a little more patience, learning to accept that this is how it is. You could probably spend a lot of time trying to change it, but it's not going to change. There's certain things you learn to live with and you learn to go with the flow. And to be honest, if I wanted the same thing here that I want in the UK, then why did I leave the UK? I wanted a slower life. I wanted to enjoy. I'm a very outdoors person. I wanted to enjoy that more. I wanted to slow down a little bit. And I just wanted to not work that hard. That's bottom line. Just didn't want to work that hard.
Work culture. This is such an important topic. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a minute, we've had lots of different examples of work culture shock, many different things that can go on that are normal or abnormal. And it's always really fascinating to me to learn more about how my guests navigate that. And so I asked Janice, what were the cultural adjustments she needed to make, especially when it comes to work culture in Antigua?
The organization I worked for had always hired expats. So even though it's regional, it's actually owned by an Irish CEO. So it had a very much suppose, a white board, Irish board, and stuff like that. So a lot of the people they brought in for CEOs in the company, in the different countries, were pale, male, and stale. That's what I always used to tell them. They're always white men. So me coming in at first, it was a little bit about, we're not sure about her, she's English. But then I could also speak dialect or patois. So when I dropped that a couple of times, it was like, we're not sure. She looks like us. She sounds like us. I think it was a little easier to assimilate. That's not to say, however, that because it is a small island, what I did find it is very cliquey. So it's very much about what school did you go to? Who did you grow up? You're in, but you're also on the outside as well.
Janice's story is a part of a limited series that I'm doing within this season of Flourish and Foreign, really focusing on specific topics around aging abroad. And Janice and I had an opportunity to discuss her viewpoints on the differences between aging in Antigua versus the UK.
You know what? I think it's not so much about aging in the UK or Antigua for me. It's about aging now, because as I said, I'm turning 60 in a couple of days. And what I envisioned 60 to be when I was maybe in my 20s and 30s is totally different to what I see 60 being. So my 60 is not my mama's 60. That's normally what I would say. So I feel I'm a lot more active. I'm a lot more involved. I'm not sitting back with the knitting or my feet up or expecting to slow down anytime soon. So I think it's not so much about just the cultures. I think it's just the generation. It's a generational aspect as well, that we're living longer, but we're also I probably want to say aging slower, if that makes sense. And I look at how my mum was, and I went back to look after her last year. Went back to the UK before she passed. And there's only 17 years between me and her. And I'm like, I can't see myself being like that then. I don't see it. I see myself being a lot more vitality, a lot more energy. And I just think it's a different generational aspect as opposed to just the cultures. But I also think that they made the elderly a little more respected, more in the Caribbean than they would do in the UK. We're probably seen, but then I don't think I look like an elder per se. And even some of the elders I do know who are maybe 20 years older than me, I'm like, I want to be like you. You're driving up and down. You're still very active. There's almost like a regression. The sun, the weather, the environment actually gives you that little bit of uplift, more vitality than you would being in the cold, dark, dank UK. When we built the house, we deliberately said we only wanted it on one level for when we get old. And we had that, we said we didn't want to grow old in the cold, which is why we moved out here. So we had that. But now we're having that conversation with my husband. I was okay, this is how much it's knowing our limitations. There's some things we can and can't do, maybe physically now. So we've seen the trees get much bigger and we know we can't go in the tree and cut that down. We need to get help. So we're having that dialogue about, okay, what does help look like to us? Do we need someone to come in, maybe not just we're good now, but we're opening ourselves to the idea that maybe in a few years we may have to hire help to come in to do some of the basic stuff just to support us. So I think it's important when people are looking at the expat life that is it temporary or is it permanent? For me, this is permanent. This is home. So what are the steps I'm going to put in to make it permanent? Similar as I would have done in the UK anyway. I'd have had probably the same challenges, maybe not as much support because I don't have family over here, but then there's no guarantees for that either in the UK. So, it's having that thought process about thinking, as I said, is it temporary or is it permanent? And what are the steps you're putting in to support that? Because I think if your outlook is temporary, then there's always an escape plan. If things goes wrong, you've got an escape plan. If it's permanent, well, this is it. So how do I make this as palatable as possible?
Healthcare. Healthcare is important no matter what stage of life you're in. However, healthcare with an eye to aging abroad has its own nuances and different considerations. And so I asked Janice to chat about her experiences of healthcare in Antigua versus the UK.
So the NHS I know is problematic, and now I live abroad and have not been in the system. Back in the day, people used to say they'd come to the Caribbean and they'd fly back over when they got sick and the NHS would pick them up. It doesn't work like that anymore. And I found that out when my own father-in-law's moved back from Jamaica back to the UK. We've had to re-register him and stuff like that. So I understand that process. And it's also a lot more problematic. And I found that with my mom. Here, we do have some we call them medical benefits. We do have some. And what they will do is they'll probably take the top 10 most black diseases from hypertension, cholesterol, stuff like that. And if you've paid into the medical benefit system, your medication's covered. You don't pay for that medication. Now, there may be some tests. You can go to the hospital again. You can get your tests done. It may take a little bit longer, but at reduced rate, or you can pay privately. I did at one time have private insurance that I was paying, but the insurance here, period, is very expensive, with the exception of car insurance. But house insurance, because of hurricanes, and medical insurance is very expensive. And what I was finding was that I'm paying out this medical insurance every year. It was quite a lot of money. But what I was getting back in return, because I just need to get my eyes done or a dental checkup, it wasn't worth it. So what I've done now is taken that money and just save it. So if anything does come up, I can pay for my medical treatment. But I tend to take a more preventative approach. So like I will have an annual checkup with my doctor, do the tests. What do I need to do? Are there any things I need to look out for? I have my mammograms and my smears and all that kind of stuff. So if I need to pick up anything serious, I can pick it up. I exercise every other day. I'm 4 or 5 miles every other day. That for me is just great. In the morning, I live not far from the beach. So I can walk to the beach and spend 30 minutes in the water, and it's healing properties, so they keep telling you. So for me, healthcare is more preventative. That's not going to say it's going to stop everything, but I don't want to be eating unhealthily and stuff like that and exacerbating a situation that I could actually avoid, which is very simple, very easy to avoid relatively. So I tend to take that approach. If anything serious happened, I already know I'd probably have to fly off island, probably to the US. There's one main hospital here, and it does what it can do. It has oncology and stuff like that. But for major, specialist stuff, if anything seriously did happen, I know I'd have to go off island. So I'd have to cover that financially, though I may be able to get some support from the government, but that's not guaranteed. But for basic healthcare, I don't think we do too badly, to be honest. Don't we do too badly?
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. And if you are, please consider supporting this labor of love, but labor nonetheless, by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/flourishforeign. Make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast, and please review the podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to the show. Fun fact, if you listen on Spotify, you can leave me comments that I can actually respond to. Yeah. Make sure you follow the podcast on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and all the other social media platforms that the podcast has. If you want to read more of my personal truths and musings as I explore and navigate the intersection of migration, Blackness, womanhood, and wellness, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings by Christine Job. And for all other Flourish in the Foreign resources about moving, living, and thriving abroad, including guides, courses, and more, be sure to go to flourishintheforeign.com. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. Now, back to the episode. Motherhood. Yeah, motherhood doesn't stop, does it? I wouldn't know. I don't have children. But for those of you that do, motherhood does not stop. It doesn't stop once you go abroad. And as many of you know, I have a whole compilation series about Black motherhood abroad, so definitely check that out. But I asked Janice to share more about her experience in motherhood abroad. Her children are grown, but as I said before, motherhood doesn't stop.
There are times I found it difficult not seeing them as often as I could. And I think it really hit me when my grandson was born, because I don't have a relationship as much as I would like to have with my grandson. But technology isn't a full substitute, but it helps. But I also think, on one hand, and I used to say this to the boys actually, I'm an individual. I was an individual before I had you. I'm your mother, but I was an individual before I had you. I am your mother, but I can't put my life on hold just to be your mother, if that makes sense. I could have sat in the UK and had you visit me. I knew you were going to leave home. So I'm going to sit there and wait for you to visit me when you choose to visit me once a fortnight. And that'd be my life. And I'm like, but I was still young. I had my kids in my 20s. So I was still relatively young and I still had life to live. So again, there may be times you feel a little bit guilty. Look, I'll be on a plane at the drop of a hat if they need me. They know that. They call me anytime, I'm there. That's not a problem. But I also stressed, as I said, that I'm more than just a mother. I'm Janice. And Janice has aspirations. Janice has dreams. I want to live them too.
A part of living abroad at any age, but definitely when we're thinking about aging abroad, is of course estate planning. And so I asked Janice to briefly describe her preparation in estate planning in Antigua.
I'm actually in the process of drafting my will. We have had the discussion about that as well. We've already had that discussion. And we've also had that discussion, dare I say, about where we will be buried. My husband said, I'm not going to be here. I'll be dead. So I don't care where I am. So it's okay. I'm like, but maybe I want the boys to visit me. And I'm like, so I'm thinking, but then my mom's buried in the UK and I'm out here. So when do I get to see, So I'm like, and like you say, I'm not going to know in all intents and purposes. I'm not going to know. So I think I just want to make the most, make sure you come and see me as much as possible while I'm still on this mortal earth. And then we'll take it from there. We'll take it from there.
Janice's husband is Jamaican and Janice is from Antigua. And so I was curious to hear Janice's take on the impact of moving to Antigua on her marriage.
I think for the two of us, we're both British born. So we grew up knowing the British way. So, so we have that between the two of us. Moving here for him, it was a little more difficult because he couldn't work for at least 3 years. He didn't have citizenship. So we had to wait 3 years before he could get citizenship. So I think it was a bit of a struggle for him initially. But then he found other ways to be part of the community. We're both into cycling. So he's now part of the Cycling Federation, on the board there. He does work and he works for himself now. Once he could start working, he did start working. But here, there's a very big expat community, I'm not talking white expat. I'm talking there's a big Jamaican community. There's a big Spanish, Dominican Republic, Guyanese, Dominican. There's a lot of different islands here on one island. So you don't always know you're from different islands until you say, actually, I'm this. So it's a bit of a melting pot itself here as it is. And as I said, there's a very big Jamaican community out here as well.
I'm always fascinated with interpersonal relationships abroad, specifically in community building.
There's an expat community and, my husband's part of the WhatsApp group. I'm like, I just can't be asked. It's just not for me because I just find you're trying to almost recreate maybe some of the UK stuff in Antigua. And I'm like, but you've come to Antigua. So why are you complaining about that? Because if you want that, you need to go, dare I say, go back to where you came from. Do which is really hard. But that's not what you, that's why did you come here? Check yourself. What is it you came here for? And is it so bad that you can't get all the things or your favorite can of beans or whatever, or you have to pay through the nose for a can of beans compared to what you do get? There can be a trade off to what it is. If I'm honest, my working allowed me to get access to some places that I probably wouldn't have got to if I wasn't working. And then there's some groups, because of just how their thinking can be different to mine, I find it can be more irritating for me. So I'm like, if you're going to make it hard work and really frustrate me, I don't need to do that. I just step back. I'm good. I really don't have much to do with expats out here. Really don't. I really don't. I suppose when I think about it, I'm like, oh, you're actually quite insular. It's just you and your husband mostly. I've got the odd few friends, people I'd want to actually go and have a drink with. But then I was exactly the same in the UK. So I think it's just me. I've probably got a couple of people I can say, look, we haven't seen each other for a while. Let's go out and have a coffee. Let's go and have a quick drink. And that'll be it. And I'm good. I've got my garden and my dogs and the husband.
I asked Janice to reflect upon how she has felt and navigated her space as a Black woman abroad.
I don't really feel there's been much of a change, but I do find sometimes that I suppose men out here, they can be quite explicit. They don't hide the fact if they think you're a good looking woman, or they want to get to know you better. And sometimes I can be just like, really, I could be your grandmother. Get a grip. You know, sometimes you just, and I'm like, and I really don't. Yeah, I'm not really giving it much thought. And maybe that's part of it because I haven't had to think about it. And they regard me as a good looking woman. It's great. It's fine. I can deal with that. I can give as good as I get. But I've never felt threatened by it or per se. Maybe if I was in the UK sometimes, I'd be a bit more wary about walking down the street or stuff like that. You're from Trinidad. You know what carnival's like and fetting, So it's a similar culture out here when it comes, sometimes a little bit too much for me because I'm like, oh, steady on, back off a little bit. But I just accept that's how it is. As long as you respect my no, I'm good.
Janice is clearly a dynamo. She really is. From having a very successful career in the UK, wanting a slower pace of life, getting a fantastic job in Antigua, that was an amazing opportunity, but did not necessarily bring the slower pace of life all the way. I asked Janice, how does she navigate her career pivots, and how did she navigate and overcome career burnout?
I was in my 50s and I decided enough was enough. I was working incredibly hard. I had a couple of burnout experiences while I was here because it was a very different. As much as the company I was here in the Caribbean, it was very Western driven. So all the demands, the KPIs, all those things, those numbers, it was very much a Western way of working in this environment. So very driven, very demanding, and I'm like, oh. This is exhausting. This is absolutely exhausting. And I was miserable. And then I'd be seeing my husband trot off to work and I'd be leaving and he'd be smiling because he's now doing what he wants to do. And I'm like, whoa, I am miserable here. So as I said, I remember having this conversation with my husband and realizing, look, I can't do this anymore. And he said, if you don't want to do it, you can stop. And I'm like, he said, you've done enough. And in fact, it's probably the longest I'd worked at any organization because after 4 years, I've always said, well, does this work for me now? No, it doesn't. I'm off to go somewhere new. And I've always done that throughout my career. So 7 years for me was more than enough. I'd longer than I ever spent at any organization. But the chance of me getting a senior job was a little slimmer. The added benefit I think I had as well is that because I live on an island, I was paid well. There's nowhere to spend the money. So I saved a lot. I saved a lot. So I did have, in all honesty, had a nice cushion behind me that allowed me to almost take a year off I traveled a bit on my own. I wrote a book. I started my podcast. I started off going into coaching, think I'd do women in leadership, and found that I've always been a leader. I don't want to do this anymore. Leadership does not do anything for me. And what was naturally happening was that women over a certain age, over 50, were coming to me and said, I heard you left your job. How did you do that? How did you have the courage to do that? What happened? So what I've naturally gone into now is actually working with women over 50 about what's the next phase for your life? What's the next chapter? Be that career, be that life. What does it look like? How do you want to do it? How do you overcome the fear? Because it's not that it can't be done. It's that we're telling ourselves we can't do it because of all the fears. And what I find is a lot of women are in careers that being of Caribbean descent, I always like to say sometimes we have jobs that make our family look good, make our parents look good, because it gives our parents bragging rights. So I've got a lawyer, I've got a doctor, I've got this. It's not just the job we wanted, but we were told it was the job we were going to be doing because that's what was expected. And when you really finally realize, I've spent all these years doing this now, there's that sunk cost fallacy. I've put all these years in it. Can I really walk away? It's not about walking away. It's about how can you turn all those years of experience, as I call your wisdom capital, how can you turn that into doing something that actually does align with who you are now, your future you, your values and your priorities? And I think that's what it is of me. It's about value, being more value driven in my life as opposed to just career. I can enjoy it. So that's where This Woman Can was born. The book I wrote it's This Woman Can, the no bullshit guide for women who lead. At the time, there was a lot of Sheryl Sandberg about leaning in and how you should do this. And I'm like, I've had my experience in the boardroom, and that's not what it's like for us. I wrote it from a practical perspective, things like down to what to wear in the boardroom, how to navigate the boardroom, who you should look for, your allies, a good pair of shoes if you're standing up presenting because no one'd like your toes to pinch. What happens if your partner isn't on a career trajectory that you is not supportive? What can you do? They're not as driven. How can you create boundaries for not just work, but your family, your children? If you're working at this level, if you're going to be at that senior level, what's the real skinny? What is it you really need to know about working at that level and how it can help? So I did it from, I suppose, my viewpoint and my experiences, some of the women I'd worked with that helped them navigate that actual stage of life or leadership. This Woman Can has evolved definitely to more about Black women over 40, over 50, about how you navigate life, how you navigate careers. Like recently I did a webinar about beyond the corporate ladder, reimagine your career past 50, because a lot of us can't think we can't make that change now. We tell ourselves it's too late, I'm too old, or society has told us that because ageism kicks in and things like that. And it's just really to dispel some of those myths and actually help them have a plan. It's not going to happen overnight. You do need to plan it, but you don't need to feel like you're stuck or you're trapped in a career you can't get out of. And as I say to women, I said, look, pension age now is 70. Definitely for women in the UK. When I was coming up, it was, I think 60 was your pension age. And obviously it's evolved over those years. So in my head, pension, 60, you could stop working, but now it's 70. So for women who are just hitting 50, that's 20 years of working. And the question I ask is, do you see yourself doing this for 20 years? Doing what you're doing right now for 20 years? And invariably it's like, whoa, never thought about it like that. But there's still time to make a change. There's still time to enjoy what you do for this latter stage of your career. When I first launched my business and I moved into the coaching space, I deep down knew who I wanted to work with, but I'd never say who I wanted to work with. I'd always mask it. I'd always like women of color, this kind of thing. But it got to the point where I'm thinking, I only want to work with Black women. That's who I prefer to work with. That is my preference. So slowly over the years, I felt more confident because when I was in the UK, you really couldn't say things like that. It wasn't politically correct was the term we always used. You had to be politically correct and stuff like that. And feeling quite comfortable now, when I think about it, is like how comfortable I am now saying, I just want to work with Black women. That's what I do. Mature professional Black women. That's who I want to work with. They're comfortable with me. We can have a dialogue. I understand them. They understand me. We're of a certain age. We've had similar challenges and similar upbringings. And it feels a lot easier to say that while I'm here than I think. I'm not sure how comfortable I would have been saying that in the UK, even though I follow what's happening in the UK a lot. And I can see they've just gone through Black History Month. And I'm thinking, we're still doing that. We're still having to do that. We're still having to not apologize for who we are, but to keep shouting about who we are and saying, we're here, we've done this, we deserve to be here. Whereas I don't feel to do that here. This is where I belong. And it's a very different feeling, having that sense of belonging.
I asked Janice to reflect upon her life in Antigua and if she feels as if she is living a soft life.
I suppose I do, because I'm looking out my window now and I have my vegetable garden and I love spending hours in my vegetable garden. Normally you'll see me with a bandana around my head and a pair of overalls on because I'm getting dirty. Or I'll be walking in the morning, or I would cycle. And that to me is soft life. I choose the hours I work. I'm very particular about how much I work. And my ethos always been, I don't want to work that hard. So I create those boundaries. So if I'm choosing to work with you on a day that I don't normally work, it's because I'm choosing to. It's my choice. Not that I'm being forced to do it or I have to do it. So I think I do have a soft life. The beach is down the road. I take it for granted. It's there. I walk the dogs. I'll trim the head. I suppose I do have a soft life. I'll go and get a massage. I've got that scheduled for Sunday. Go and massage and a pedicure because my birthday's coming up. I'm going to have my makeup done because my birthday's coming up. But again, because I'm turning 60, let me just do it. It's just an ease. It's just an ease. It's not the need. I don't have that need to keep up with the Joneses, as they say, to have the latest fashion, to have I drive a pickup. That's my car because it shifts stuff very quickly for me. I'm happy with that. I don't need it was a new pickup when I bought it. It's not so new now, but it does the job. And I find the material things that I would have striven for when I was in the UK, I don't have that feel to have that out here. I do own my house. I paid the mortgage off, so I own the house outright. That's fine. We don't have the overhead. But that alone has allowed me to feel relaxed because I don't have to work at a level that means I have to go out to pay the mortgage.
I asked Janice what her personal definition of wellness is and how that definition, that practice, that concept has evolved during her time in Antigua.
Wellness for me is more mental. It's that ease of waking up in the morning and then, let me look at the weather and go, is it raining? No, it's not raining. Maybe I'll go. And if it is raining, I'll still go for my walk. Let me put my runners on, go for a walk. Which way shall I go? I'll go down to the beach. I'm not a big water baby, but I do love the sound of the waves. So walking a mile along the beach for me is wellness. And having that morning walk really sets me up for the day, makes me feel good. Then there's planning my day. And if it's not a work day, you'll find me in the garden. So it's either between, and then maybe once a fortnight, I'll go to the supermarket and get my shopping, but then grow my own vegetables. The sense of knowing that I grew this. And this, for me, that's all part of the wellness. It's more mental than just the physical. It's a feeling.
Thank you, Janice, so much for sharing your amazing story with all of us and inspiring me to possibly move to the Caribbean. We will see. To be determined. If you enjoyed Janice's story and want to connect with her online, you can.
My podcast is This Woman Can. You can head over to my website, janicesutherland.com, or you can find me. Most of my happy places LinkedIn and Instagram. So I am Janice Sutherland. So you'll find me mostly on there.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. To learn more information about this guest, be sure to check out their show notes page on the website flourishintheforeign.com. If you'd like to delve deep into my personal thoughts about life abroad, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings. If you enjoy this solo indie Black woman podcast, be sure to support this podcast by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/flourishforeign. You can also support the podcast by subscribing to the podcast, leaving a review of the podcast, and of course, sharing the podcast. For resources like the Move Abroad with Intention guide and course, be sure to check the links in the description of this episode and the website flourishintheforeign.com. To learn more about me, Christine Job, my work as a business strategist, and all my resources about business strategy, building a business, and more, check out the links in the description of this episode and go to christinejob.com. Big thanks to all of you, my lovely listeners who have kept this podcast going strong for 6 seasons. Thank you all so much. I love you and I appreciate you. And thanks to Zachary Higgs for producing the music for this here podcast. Remember, it is not about moving abroad. It's not about being abroad. It's about thriving abroad. It's about flourishing abroad. So go abroad and cultivate a life well lived. See you next time. Bye. In the next episode of Flourish in the Foreign.
But it was very affordable for me as a freelancer, imagine. And where she is now, she obviously has 24-hour care and the nurse sleeps in the room with her. The nurse has her own bed. It's a really large room. My mother has her own bathroom. They wash the clothes, they iron them, they do all of the things. I'm fortunate that Nairobi offers these things. Other African cities do not. Like my girlfriend from Uganda was like, you're so lucky because we don't have anything like this in Kampala.